In this video, we're going to be talking about the story of Gideon, a story of conquering self-doubt. The story of Gideon is one of transformation, a man overflowing with doubt who eventually rises to become a mighty warrior under God's guidance. At its heart, this is a story about conquering self-doubt. In fact, I personally struggle with self-doubt, and Gideon's journey offers comfort and hope. It shows that God is patient, that He provides what we need to face our fears, and that He uses our smallest offerings in powerful ways. When we first encounter Gideon in Judges chapter 6, the Israelites are suffering under the oppression of the Midianites. For 4 years, the Midianite raiders had stolen their crops and livestock, leaving Israel impoverished. This can maybe parallel modern experiences. Sometimes we work hard only to have our efforts thwarted by unexpected hardships, job losses, or maybe others taking credit for our work. In Gideon's day, Israel cried out to the Lord for deliverance, and the Lord answered by calling the most unlikely person to bring about that rescue. An angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, calling him a mighty warrior. At the time, Gideon was hiding in a winepress, threshing wheat in secret to avoid Midianite detection. His first response is doubt, essentially asking, if the Lord is truly with us, why has all this happened? Where were all the miracles we've heard about from our ancestors? The angel doesn't offer a direct explanation. Instead, he replies with a profound statement, go in the strength you have. Am I not sending you? So often, we ask God to fix our problems. Maybe difficult work situation, a challenging relationship, or a personal struggle, without considering that God might send us as part of the solution. Gideon's self-doubt resonates with many of us. But I'm the weakest in my family, Gideon had said. My clan is the weakest of them all. Yet God does not choose based on human qualification. He sees potential where we often only see weakness. God commands Gideon to tear down an altar of Baal and cut down an Asherah pole. Gideon obeys, but does so at night, out of fear. When the townspeople discover what happened, they go to Gideon's house and demand justice. It's Gideon's father who comes out and defends him. This incident shows a key point. Sometimes we obey, only timidly at first, but God still honors our beginnings. Even small acts of obedience can lead to bigger victories later on. It's also clear that Gideon is a bit of a coward here. His father has to step in to save him from the angry townspeople. Even if we start off with a kind of cowardly obedience, God can still provide a way through, especially when we need saving. Gideon isn't instantly transformed into a fearless warrior. He asks for multiple signs to confirm God's calling. First sign, the fleece. Gideon places a wool fleece on the ground, asking that it be wet with dew while the ground remains dry on the next day. And God grants this sign, and Gideon wrings a bowl full of water from the fleece. After this sign, Gideon is still unsure. He then asks that the fleece remain dry while the ground around be covered with dew on the next morning. God patiently honors Gideon's request. The scripture even shows Gideon saying something like, please don't be angry with me. Let me just make one more request. It's almost humorous how often he needs reassurance, and it shows God's patient, gentle response. Even after all these signs, God knows Gideon is still battling self-doubt. He sends him yet another sign of victory. God tells Gideon, if you're still afraid, go down to the camp and listen. Gideon sneaks around the Midianite camp, and he overhears a Midianite soldier recounting a dream that foretells Midian's defeat. It's quite an interesting dream where a cake of barley rolls down the mountain and crushes the Midianite camp. This shows how God works in the background for our victory, while we may be battling our own self-doubt. Each sign demonstrates God's willingness to meet Gideon's doubt with gentleness and reassurance. Sometimes when I'm not particularly forthright in my calling, and I fear that there may be judgment or perhaps miss out on a blessing, I think of Jonah when he needed a storm and being swallowed by a giant fish to compel his obedience, and needed to stew in regret for days in the belly of the beast. But in Gideon's story, he is confronted with encouragement rather than forced into humbleness. This shows a beautiful truth. God does not always need to humble us through trials. He can also be gentle and give us signs, encouragement, and provision if that's what we need. As Gideon prepares for battle, he initially gathers a large army, but God tells him to reduce the numbers from 32,000 to just 300. The reason? If Israel wins with too many soldiers, they might attribute the victory to their own strength rather than by God's. By choosing only 300 men, God shows that his power is not constrained by what looks logical to us. A relatable modern example might be finding yourself short on funding, understanding, or lacking the usual resources, yet God can still open unexpected doors or inspire creative solutions. In doing so, he reminds reminds us that success depends on his power, not our abundance. Gideon's 300 men encircle the vast Midianite army in the valley of Jezreel, taking the higher ground in the surrounding hills. Each man is equipped with a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch inside the jar. At Gideon's signal, they blow the trumpets, smash the jars, revealing the torches, and shout, "A sword for the Lord of Gideon!" The enemy camp, so overtaken by surprise and fear, flee in disarray and confusion. So how did this plan work exactly? There were a couple of factors. It was a surprise attack. The Midianites asleep in the valley awakened confusion to the sound of trumpets and the sudden flash of torches. One thing to keep in mind in that era, trumpets were usually reserved for commanders. Hearing so many trumpets might have led the Midianites to believe multiple divisions were attacking them. Darkness and echoes amplify the noise of just 300 trumpets, giving the impression of a massive army. Also, the Midianites, already spooked by the dream Gideon overheard, panicked and turned on one another. Another factor, self-doubt as a weapon. Fascinatingly, God uses the Midianites' own self-doubt to defeat them. The terror and confusion in the darkness cause them to flee or fight each other. It's a perfect parallel. The very self-doubt Gideon struggled with is turned against the enemy. God can use our weaknesses for victory in surprising ways. Throughout the story of Gideon, we see that God calls the least likely. Gideon is from the weakest clan, and he's the least in his family. Yet the Lord calls him mighty warrior. This pattern echoes elsewhere in Scripture. Judah was the youngest son of Jacob, yet his line became the lineage of Israel's king, including David and Jesus. And Jacob himself was younger than Esau. David too was overlooked by his own family, but chosen to be king. Jesus, born in an obscure town, died a criminal's death and rose to redeem the world. God's power shines most brightly in places we least expect. We also learn that God multiplies what we bring. Gideon has only 300 men to face an enormous army. Just as Jesus once fed thousands with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish from a boy's lunch. Imagine that boy wondering how his lunch could feed so many. When we step forward in faith, God uses our meager resources far beyond what we could manage on our own. Another overarching lesson is God's gentleness and patience. While stories like Jonah demonstrate how God may humble us through trials, Gideon's experience shows how he might provide encouragement and reassurance instead. Whether by signs or quiet nudges of the Spirit, God gives each of us what we need to move forward, and he can still use us even if we're not so forthright in our actions. Finally, the real battle in Gideon's journey is overcoming self-doubt. The Midianites' vast army isn't Gideon's main obstacle, his own fear is. Once he places his trust in God's promise, the physical victory follows almost naturally. It's a reminder that faith in God's calling can conquer even the most entrenched personal doubts. The account of Gideon serves as a potent reminder that God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. Even when we're plagued with self-doubt, he is patient. He provides exactly what we need to step into his purpose, sometimes humbling, sometimes encouraging, but always loving. For those of us who struggle with self-doubt, Gideon is a beacon of hope. His journey assures us that even in the midst of uncertainty, God remains faithful. When the odds look impossible, he is the one who grants victory. So take heart. God can use your seemingly small contribution, your stumbling obedience, and your timid faith to achieve victories you never imagined. When you bring your doubts before him, he will meet you with gentleness, signs, and power to stand strong, just as he did with Gideon. I would like to open the floor to you guys in the comments. Has the Lord ever helped you with your own self-doubt? Has the Lord provided in any unexpected ways? Or is there something in your life that Gideon's story reminds you of? I would love to hear from you. And remember, if the Lord is for you, who can be against you?